Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with the midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. And there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up that you think will be worth more in the future than they are now, and then take advantage whenever you feel ready if you wish to do so. We're going to start by recapping this news out of Missouri, as so far cumulatively they have surpassed 1 billion in legal sales. And so they did launch for medical in October 17th of 2020, and seems like from October 17th, 2020 till February or so they had about 700 million in sales from medical only, but thanks to the helpful launch of adult use on February 3rd, and having sold about 350 million from February 3rd until now, that has pushed Missouri's total sales over 1 billion. So thank God for Missouri for being a diamond in the rough during these trying times. Otherwise, we'd be in a much darker place if every single state focused on that social equity myth, which essentially just lets identity politics seep in and ruin it for everybody. And so rest of the stories down here, if you want to pause to read, highlighting the amount of jobs and obviously the benefits of no longer criminalizing people and giving their lives back through expungements as well, and highlighting that Missouri is growing twice as fast as Illinois apparently so far. And with that, the big news of the week, take this with a grain of salt because we've gotten lip service with no action for the last 2.5 years, but for what it's worth from Marijuana Moment, we are 2.5 years into the future. The problem has only gotten worse. Banks need cash. People continue to die, and it's about time he ought to do this. But Schumer says cannabis banking bill will go to the Senate floor. That's a first, with expungements and social justice attached. Better than using the word social equity at New York cannabis rally. And so just going to go through his words and see what he has to say. This whole paragraph is so painful to read because it's almost like he has no idea what's going on in New York, and I'm sure he doesn't really get the gist of it. He's just told what, his team wants to tell him, and of course they're going to paint the prettiest picture possible. But we struck a real victory here in New York with legalization, which I pushed the legislature to do, Schumer said. And while there are definitely real changes in implementation in this state, no one can take away what legalizing cannabis means as a bellwether in this country. And fair enough, symbolic, it is a big gesture, but when New York has 5 legal dispensaries and 2,500 illicit outlets selling at 1/3 of the price of the legal dispensaries, you cannot call that a success. Now Congress has to catch up. I'm working on Congress to catch up to New York. No, you want to catch up to Missouri, if anything, and you just start by doing your goddamn job. And hopefully we've gotten to that point, folks. Obviously we all love that, but we will put the bill on the floor. God willing, we get the votes in the committee. And so he thinks, or he's telling everyone, if only we can get the votes, we'll put the bill on the floor, though, which is promising. And again, we will add it to expungement of the records of all those who suffered from the overcriminalization of cannabis. Schumer said at an event, the Safe Banking Act is a good thing. So first time hearing him say the Safe Banking Act is a good thing in a standalone sentence, but also they will add the expungements of records, and it seems like that's all they're going to add. So from my understanding, I get that as being safe plus hope. Do you get that differently? Let me know in the comments, but I do think that's possibly something that they've negotiated, and both sides agree that this is what they can attach to SAFE, possibly, if they can attach any social justice provisions, and that's how we can get this bipartisan thing through, potentially. And so that's just my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments, but we need to do social justice and attach it to SAFE and pass it together. The majority leader said, and so of course, I don't think anything more than hope will get passed, and maybe that's why it's just going to be safe and hope. But so I'm with you all the way. I can't wait when we'll come back here and celebrate in Union Square in the near future, and then get this, and say cannabis is legalized in all the United States of America. What tricks does he think he has up his sleeves? I'm not sure, but just wanted to share the quotes from that weekend. And then he says, well, God willing, if we get the votes. We know that we've had the votes for a long time, but figured I'd share this from YTVY, reiterating that bill to allow cannabis businesses to use banks may have enough votes to pass the Senate. So for what it's worth, you can pause to read this top part if you're interested, but just going to bring you down, pause to read this part if you're interested as well. But the main juice down here tells us A, what we already know, and B, that this might be the confidence Schumer needs to actually send it to the floor for a vote, because why put anything on the floor if it's not going to pass? You want to make sure that it's actually going to pass, right? So we now have momentum in that we have quite a substantial number of Republicans on the bill. We have 40 sponsors. They needed 10. They've got 40 if, of course, they couldn't get all the Dems on board. But we have the support of the majority leader as well, reiterating Shmuck. We've been working very closely with the chair of the Banking Committee, Sherrod Brown, where the bill will go next, and he said we will move quickly, and so the path is looking like the best opportunity we've ever had, said Merkley. So it seems like they genuinely believe it's going to pass. This month, the ABA also sent a letter urging Congress to pass it, and again, American Bankers Association calls for swift passage of cannabis banking ahead of Senate committee hearing, and so this is another call as of May 9th. The Safe Banking Act is urgently needed. and widely supported bipartisan solution. 100%. It's about time you enact this. And then just so for what it's worth, thank you, Todd, for sharing this one. A senator's push for cannabis industry access to federal small business loans and services. And I agree with this 100%. But isn't it just ironic that SAFE is essentially this? So once you pass SAFE, you might not need to try as hard for this. And again, take the federal government out of this. Leave it to the states to provide the loans. At least that's just my point of view. But SBA loans would support a rapidly growing industry that creates jobs, supports small businesses, and raises revenues in states that have chosen to legalize cannabis. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot harder to do that without access to banking or just being able to use credit cards in your stores to get real payment processing through without the risk of cash. But again, I digress. Just sharing, at least better than not. More on this link if you wanted to read through it. But with that, Potjock sharing, nice to see a cannabis article as the top trending on CNBC. You do not see that every day, that's for sure. As long as Kramer isn't bullish on pot stocks, I think we'll all be okay. And so for what it's worth, wanted to share this as of May 8th. Interesting mainstream media outlet like CNBC highlighting cannabis, the states that will legalize weed next. And so for what it's worth, this is the article if you're interested in reading it. Of course, you can grab the link in the description. But just to highlight, cannabis is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and more states incentivized by tax revenue and job opportunities are getting in on the green rush. Which is true, despite backwards communist state regulators and state politicians like we saw in New York and New Jersey, and Congress doing everything in their power to work against the industry and not help it thrive, unfortunately. But this has been the foundation of my thesis, where I believe we're going to see another big green wave. The first one was when Canada legalized. The second was after the Dems won in 2020. We hit the peak in February, and I think the third one is going to be coming after this. But again, that's just my opinion, hence why I've put my money where my mouth is. In April, Delaware became the 22nd state to legalize rec cannabis, and then Minnesota soon after will become the 23rd, while Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania also have a chance to legalize weed in the coming years. And so you can pause to read some of the highlights of the notable progress that the cannabis industry is making despite having all hands tied behind their backs. A little bit more down here if you wanted to pause to read, otherwise the full link covering each state and their plans. Well, we've got this one from New Cannabis Ventures. As expected for the month of March, cannabis sales rebound. It's our best month since December, and that's all you can muster up for a title, Alan? Good news, though, is that the trend continues where typically 3 times in a year we see a big jump in sales. March and April, as spring comes and people prepare for 420, and we see sales hit a previous high set the year before. And then the second time is usually July, when people are out and about enjoying their summer and voting for legal cannabis with their dollars. And then lastly, we see the biggest jump in December for the holidays as people want to end their year with lots of cannabis. And so pause to read if you're interested, but this is Florida, set a new monthly record despite being medical only, and having adult use likely going to be put on the ballot for 2024, coming into effect in 2025. But that's Florida if you want to pause to read. We've got Illinois here if you want to pause to read. So again, big December, lull January, Feb, big March again. Maryland, medical only, but going to launch as of July 1st. So that's going to be promising. We're going to see some sales or some more growth out of the state, but again, December, see Jan, Feb, and then March. Massachusetts, you can pause to read. And then Michigan as well, pause to read. Nice to see that big jump in Michigan. Ooh, love that competitive market. Pennsylvania, you can pause to read. Well, on to Western markets as BDSA provides coverage for Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, and Oregon. And so for Arizona, one of the more recent states on the West to launch for adult use, it's been steady for a while, likely because of the illicit problems that the states on the West face versus the East. The weather's just better, therefore more illicit to compete with the legal market. But good news out of the more mature markets in the country, we see out of California, Colorado, and Oregon, is that apparently the supply of legal cannabis is going down, therefore causing the price to go back up, hence a spike in sales. And after the stimulus checks, which we thought would be a blessing, turned out to be a curse as it helped the illicit market crush until now. Good news is that the undersupply in the legal market is causing prices to go back up, and hopefully we'll see that continue throughout the year. Colorado, very notable though, again, struggling since those stimulus checks, now heading back up. But also, I believe Colorado, the governor recently signed a bill that would allow online cannabis sales to begin, and that could help drive more sales in that direction. But we'll look out if this continues. Nevada, again, good to see them head back up. And Oregon, like I mentioned, after months, or sorry, I should say years of struggle, and the illicit market probably being harder to compete with than ever, good to see them head back up, and so hopefully this trend will continue as we move through. Well, we got this one from the New Jersey Cannabis Trade Association, as today they celebrate May 8th, the historic signing decoupling Section 280E of the IRS tax code from the state's tax code. And so it's a nice effort. Now New Jersey's licensed cannabis operators will be treated like any other legal enterprise operating in New Jersey, a sense of normalcy that our industry will cherish. Again, doesn't change anything at the federal level, which needs to be changed, but it's a step in the right direction and shows that New Jersey is moving more in a direction of wanting to help the industry benefit and thrive as opposed to crushing it like we see out of New York. But with that from High Times, Florida lawmakers passed Cannabis Telehealth Bill, and apparently House Bill 387 also opens new medical cannabis cultivation opportunities for black farmers for what it's worth. And so more on this story if you're interested, but just wanted to share it because I think it will have an impact on the rate that Florida's medical patients can grow. If you have telehealth, it's going to make it easier, and hopefully we're going to see more than 2,000 or 3,000 patients added week over week. So here, you can pause to read more, but yeah, essentially main takeaway down here, medical cannabis patients in Florida were permitted to renew their medical cannabis recommendations via telehealth appointments temporarily in response to the pandemic, but now this would make it permanent policy, which expired in June 2020, and allow patients to once again renew their medical cannabis authorization by visiting with their physician via telehealth appointment. So more on this if you wanted to read through. And for what it's worth, thank you Connoisseurs.io for sharing this timely one, as assuming the Florida Adult Use Cannabis Ballot Initiative passes, and they get it on the ballot in November of 2024, and it would go in effect 6 months after approval around May 2025. So essentially 2 years from now. Sucks to have to wait, but I look forward to the day that we do see, in my opinion, one of the most underrated markets open the floodgates for adult use. It's going to be fun to watch. So link in the description if you want to check the source. Well, thank you Cannabis for sharing this, because I do not have access to Q1 2023 data per BDSA, but as Maryland adult use sales are set to start July 1st, we can look at the market share leaders in the med market for a sense of who stands to benefit. So we got some single state operators and multi-state operators, at least the 8 market share leaders, and just a snapshot in time from Q1, but should give a good idea, with adult use conversion fees based on sales also may reflect who will pay the most to convert, likely those in the lead because they're going to capitalize from the most adult use sales. But with that, Aaron Idle height sharing, Oregon just posted the lowest harvest in a month since July of 2020. So very similar to what I mentioned when we were going through the sales. Apparently the supply of legal cannabis is going down, hence the prices for retail and wholesale are going up. Much needed for the industry. This is down 33% in volume from the peak in the summer of 2021. So you can check the source in the description if you're interested. But very, very much needed for the industry. And great question by Connoisseurs.io. Wouldn't doubt that some people might consider this. Is it possible that lots of growers in Oregon switched to the illicit market so they could sell to New York's 1,500 illicit stores? Not out of the question, and if you're not facing any consequences in New York, why not take the leap, right? I'm not saying I would, but I don't doubt some will. And so do the right thing. Thank you for pointing out that not all states, again, follow common sense, and not all are working for their constituents. And sadly, New Hampshire Senate killed their cannabis legalization bill that they worked hard on. Apparently, they vote along party lines 3-2 to send the cannabis legalization legislation to the floor with a recommendation to kill the bill. So all that progress for nothing. But keep in mind, New Hampshire is a smaller state with a population of only 1.4 million. So we're not expecting anything big out of them, but a bit of a speed bump in the road to legalization. Some fresh MSO earnings as Trulieve reports first quarter 2023 results, marking progress on cash objectives. I guess that's what they want to lead with, since we can yet again see that they have not been able to fully integrate the harvest assets yet and get back to cash flow positive. It sucks to see in the short term, but I'm sure they will get there. For what it's worth, as a Trulieve shareholder, this is not advice, just sharing what their press release says. And also, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I don't want to make the video too long, and I don't have a background in finance. But for what it's worth, there are kind people on Twitter like Cannabis and Seishu Metacharla who often provide a deeper dive into the financials, and I will put those in the comments once I get them available, and so hopefully that will help you if you want to go through that. And so for what it's worth, you can pause to read some of the highlights, record results on 420 at least. Good to share, as customers served and units sold up 10%, 11%, and 9% respectively year over year. And then Q1 2023 financial and operating highlights, while recent development and management commentary if you want to pause to read. And then financial highlights, you can pause read. Of course, more of the numbers are down here if you want to grab the link. But with that, Verano, they announced their first quarter 2023 financial results as well. Company capitalizes on strength of recently converted adult use markets to deliver revenue of $227 million, a 12% year-over-year increase. And so again, just going to show you the highlights, management commentary if you wanted to pause to read. For Q1 2023 financial highlights, you can pause to look at the breakdown or some extra detail they added down here. While first quarter 2023 financial overview, you can pause to read if you're interested. Otherwise, last bits down here, adjusted EBITDA down to 2023 guidance, you can pause to read, and then I'll bring it down one more time to read first quarter 2023 subsequent operational highlights, and then balance sheet and liquidity. Otherwise, all the numbers, grab the link below if you're interested. And with that, Green Market Report sharing this one, as Curaleaf and Green Thumb are both bullish despite very different financials and approaches, as Big Ben has showed us that you can aim smaller, run a more controlled operation, and be producing cash flow sooner than later that then you can use to reinvest in your business and growth down the line, whereas Boris has taken a more selfish and less business-friendly approach, casting a wide net and just aiming at scale outright. While that'll take longer to get to cash flow from operations, he's essentially trying to be the Constellation Brands of cannabis. And so execs say their focus is on focused growth in 2023, while Curaleaf lost more than $1/3 billion in 2022. Chicago-based Green Thumb Industries, by contrast, made $12 million last year and $9 million in just its first quarter of 2023. So despite that gulf between them, the tone of each of the multi-state operators' earnings calls held last week was remarkably similar in tone, bullish on the future of cannabis industry. So for what it's worth, you can pause to read to learn about the different markets that they're in and hence why their approaches are different. Similar approach. In what ways are their approaches similar? And then, of course, pause to read for outlook on reform. And so with that, we've got this one from Canna. Love what he can share, some of these cool visuals. Since I've been asked a few times for this, first test version of combined public and private dispensary counts. Open to suggestions. Might consider making a cutoff of 10 plus dispensaries, for example, to give more spacing, but want to avoid removing companies if possible. And so looking at the source, he says that he looks them up on their website. There are plenty more companies and dispensaries in a state, but just add as people suggest, reach out and ask me. Trying to keep it to MSOs, but if a single state operator reaches out and asks, then he will put it on. And so for what it's worth, the source is him retrieving the dispensary counts from websites, but this is all of them. Read them and weep if you want to grab the link below. Quite a cool visual for U.S. Public and private dispensaries. And so with that, from MJ Biz Daily, is there any other industry that would do this? The cannabis industry overpaid $1.8 billion in federal taxes in 2022. And analysis shows. And the only way that they can overpay is because of the predatory 280E and just how the current situation has likely caused them to get around it. I would imagine that's also leading them to overpay, which again does not benefit the cannabis industries. Who does it ultimately benefit? The mafia government that's taking their cut. So cannabis companies paid more than $1.8 billion in federal taxes in 2022 compared to non-cannabis businesses as a result of U.S. tax treatment of the MJ sector, according to an analysis by industry research firm Whitney Economics. This excess is forecasted to increase to $2.1 billion in 2023. Portland, Oregon-based Whitney noted in a news release. Get rid of 280E ASAP. And so the excess payments are a result of Section 280E of the Federal Internal Revenue Code, a longtime thorn in the side of the U.S. cannabis businesses that are under legal state law. And so the tax burden is so heavy that only 24.4% of cannabis operators surveyed indicated that they are profitable, according to Whitney release. This is down from 42 the prior year. And so just imagine, though, once 280E is gone, I do believe that it will be gone at some point. It's, again, a when not if scenario. I hate using that term after all this time, but crazy. What other industries would deal with this and still end up paying any taxes? Just the discrimination is uncomparable. And so with that, sad news though, as Germany could have been an amazing legalization story and helped this green rush, it's turned out to be a flop. As Matt Lemmer shares, apparently the German plan for cannabis clubs, as outlined in this report, is so bad, so poorly thought out that policy failure is an absolute certainty. And the only thing worse is the status quo. And so the overseas fact-finding trip must have been a disaster. Karl Lauterbach has lost. So very sad news, because I had high hopes for Germany, and again, politics always gets in the way and ruins this, which is very unfortunate. So just to add more, Canada's cannabis laws has major flaws, but this is next level by Karl Lauterbach, who's the health minister in Germany. Canada's Liberal Party cannabis law is so discriminatory it almost completely ignored Indigenous health and economic interests, a fact which has barely been reported on in this country, despite what the media will try and tell you, because obviously it's owned by the government. But I cannot imagine a worse idea than Germany's tentative plan to cap cannabis distribution to 30 to 50 grams per member per month. Terrible. So awesome that Matt's inviting him to talks. Clearly, he's probably not going to take him up on that. But this is purportedly Germany's draft cannabis law, dated a little under 2 weeks ago. So link will be in the description if you want to go through it. I repeat my concerns about who exactly the Germans consulted on their international fact-finding missions, because they appear to have found no facts at all. And it seemed like it all went to getting what they could have proved, despite, UN ultimately having say over what the EUs can do with their own drug reform laws, which is, again, ridiculous. Putting treaties ahead of, sovereign nation's best interest. As Alfredo Pascual adds here, a leaked version of the German cannabis legalization unfinished draft bill being circulated today has a section about compatibility with international law. Why are they so obsessed with this? And again, this is infuriating, because if the German people knew that this is why they can't get legal cannabis, you'd think that they would rise up like the French. Probably not. Their pensions probably have to be at stake, but I digress. Instead of providing answers, it lists questions such as, is the draft compatible with EU law and international treaties? Like, who gives a shit, right? And well, I think, again, we all agree that people need to rise up, because that's really the only way that we're going to hold the politicians accountable that are delaying any of this progress in cannabis that we could have gotten years and years ago. But with that, just had to share, sadly, Germany is not what it could have been, and I will keep updating you as we get news out of it. And so with this, another German story. So you can grab the link in the description if you want to check that out. Now, for what it's worth, take this with a grain of salt. I'm not sharing it because I believe it to be true. I'm sharing it for context, because as a TLRY shareholder, one of the big parts of my thesis was the potential German opportunity coming out, and the fact that TLRY had a cultivation center there already for medical, and that would give them a head start. Now, that hasn't panned out, but I figured I would share that I still plan to hold on to my TLRY shares, mainly because I don't believe this industry technicals or fundamentals even matter. We're just waiting on U.S. legislation that's going to make it easier for the LPs and the MSOs. Now, the other reasons, though, is, of course, LPs like Tilray have exposure on the US markets, whereas the MSOs don't. Way more of my capital is in US MSOs, and I'm holding way more heavy bags, but again, I've made most of my money from the Canadian LPs just off of news in the past. And so that's why we'll continue to hold it. And so while Germany has changed, word is that Tilray is close to buying Pure Sun Farms for VFF, while the non-cannabis or produce business is being purchased by Mastronardi Produce and Holdings. And so at least this will help Tilray gain more market share in Canada and be a bit more dominant, but at the same time, it sucks that Germany hasn't panned out. And so another reminder that I'm an idiot, but as every day goes on, I feel like less of an idiot, and I'm getting a better grip of this investing thing. But reminder, cash is always king. And so with that, from the Wiley Online Library, as of May 3rd, 2023, patterns of problematic cannabis use in Canada pre and post legislation or legalization. Differences by neighborhood, deprivation, individual socioeconomic factors, and race and ethnicity. And so I invite you to read the introduction, methods, and results if you're interested. But just to highlight the conclusions and a big FU to prohibitionists, the risks of problematic cannabis use does not appear to have increased in the 2 years following cannabis legalization in Canada. Boom. We've seen no difference. Disparities in problematic use persisted, with some racial minority and marginalized group experiencing higher uses. And so better to try and work at solving the underlying problem as opposed to giving a band-aid solution. And ending cannabis prohibition goes a lot further, as Canada has highlighted with that. And so out of high times, 42% of American adults are using cannabis. And I would say at least 42 admitted to the survey, which is probably getting that number who admit to surveys is going up because cannabis is slowly but surely being more normalized, which is a good note to take away from this. But a new report dives into the trends and facts about today's cannabis consumer. And so don't want to spend too much time because I don't want to make the video too long, but I do invite you to pause to read if you're interested. And of course, as always, the link for the full article will be in the description. But if you ask me, this ought to be great news for any politician who's in the business of protecting public health and saving lives, right? Because we know where legal medical dispensaries are, we have a 25% reduction in opioid overdoses. That's from a Harvard study in 2014. Plus, we know legal rec allows more people to choose a safer, healthier alternative. It just is safer than potentially dangerous and more addicting substances like opioids and alcohol. It just is what it is. So link in the description if you want to read through that, but happy to share a few articles to back that up for context, as Peter Reynolds shares an article that I've featured before on the page. This is from BBC.com. Beer and wine sales in Canada fall to an all-time low. Now, this article just tells you the what. Sales in this category fell to this. Sales in this category fell to this. But it doesn't tell you why sales might be falling. The fact that cannabis has been legalized, right? They completely omit that from the article. It's infuriating. Could it be anything to do with legal cannabis? The alcohol industry is terrified of a safer, healthier alternative to its very dangerous drugs, no doubt. This is why it funds prohibition and anti-cannabis research. And just more examples, Colorado, cannabis generating 7 times the tax of alcohol, right? If that's not a sign. Colorado and Washington get more tax revenue from cannabis than alcohol or cigarettes in 2022, but the British and Irish governments prefer to earn tax from drugs that kill. Sad fact, but it's true. And then, of course, money is a powerful drug. If you want to really go down the rabbit hole, 50 years ago from NPR.org, surprising from NPR, but 50 years ago, sugar industry quietly paid scientists to blame. It's not the first time we've heard scientists paid for something. Cigarettes, safe and effective. But with that, another one from Sean Summersgill, the post-traumatic stress disorder PTSD therapeutics market, and I didn't even know this until I saw this tweet, SSRIs in the US was $750.3 million in 2022. You'd think it'd be a lot bigger, actually, but Big Pharma doesn't want to lose any of that market share to cannabis or psychedelics. Hence, another big reason when we look at OpenSecrets.org, we can see the lobbying money that goes in from Big Pharma, and we can see the lack of action, so we can connect some dots. Now, again, we could be speculating, but common side effects of SSRIs can include feeling agitated, shaky or anxious, diarrhea, and feeling or being sick, dizziness, not what you want when you've already got PTSD, and no wonder veterans prefer cannabis. And yes, oftentimes, if I'm ever feeling off, a little bit of cannabis sets me right back. It is what it is. Why you got to deschedule the plant. And lastly with that, studied as we end off scientific reports. This one's as of May 5th, 2023, titled Anti-Inflammatory Effects of CBD in Human Microglial Cell Line Infected with HIV-1. And while I may just be a layman, sounds quite promising, as if CBD helps reduce inflammation in cells infected with HIV-1. If you get something different out of that title, please let me know and correct me. But we studied the inflammatory effects of the compounds cannabidiol, CBD, in comparison with THC tetrahydrocannabinol in human microglial cells. Our results showed that CBD reduced the production of various inflammatory cytokines and chemokines such as yada, 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 yada. In addition, CBD led to the deactivation of yada, reduced yada expression, which plays a crucial role in the inflammasome cascade, or inflammasome cascade. That's very fun to say. Furthermore, CBD significantly reduced the expression of HIV. What? Huge! Huge! Our study demonstrated that CBD has anti-inflammatory properties and exhibits significant therapeutic potential against HIV-1 infections and neuroinflammation. That should be huge, huge news. Should have been huge news in the 80s, but guess what?
They end it with, however, the results of our study suggest that CBD may be promising. Not that it is promising, but suggest it may be a promising candidate for development of novel therapeutic strategies for the treatment of HIV-associated neuroinflammatory disorders. Sadly, the medical industry has been captured, but we keep fighting hard in order to get this plant descheduled so that we can give it back to the people and help restore balance, good old homeostasis that this plant provides. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video, you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody.